If you love stories about power, respect, and what happens when someone crosses the wrong man, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because this story is going to shock you. It was a cold winter night in New York City, 1957. The lights of Little Italy glowed faintly through the fog. Inside a private restaurant on Mulberry Street, men in expensive suits sat around a table covered with food, wine, and secrets. These were not ordinary men. They were the kings of the underworld, crime bosses who controlled entire neighborhoods, decided who lived comfortably and who struggled, who got protection and who got nothing. At the head of the table sat Carlo Gambino. Short, quiet, dressed simply. He looked more like a grandfather than the most feared man in New York. He barely spoke that night. He ate his food slowly, listened carefully, and watched everyone in the room with calm, dark eyes. Then a man named Vincent Scalfa stood up. Scalfa was loud, flashy, and arrogant. A mid-level boss who had recently gotten rich from a few lucky deals and now thought that made him powerful. He had been drinking too much wine. His voice was too loud. His confidence was too big. He pointed at Carlo Gambino across the table, smirked, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You think you're still the boss? You're nothing but an old man playing pretend. This city belongs to men with real power now. Men like me." The room went completely silent. Some men looked at their plates. Others slowly leaned back in their chairs, distancing themselves from what had just happened. One younger man whispered a prayer under his breath, because everyone in that room, everyone except Vincent Scalfa, knew exactly what he had just done. Carlo Gambino looked up slowly. He said nothing. He simply looked at Scalfa for a long, quiet moment. Then he picked up his fork and continued eating. 3 weeks later, Vincent Scalfa was gone. No trace, no body, no farewell, just gone. And nobody ever disrespected Carlo Gambino again. To understand why that moment was so dangerous for Scalfa, you have to understand who Carlo Gambino really was, because on the surface, he looked like the last person you should fear. Carlo Gambino was born in 1902 in Palermo, Sicily, into a family with deep roots in the Sicilian mafia. He grew up watching how men of power operated, not through loud threats or public displays, but through patience, loyalty, and the quiet accumulation of respect. He arrived in America in 1921, immigrating illegally on a cargo ship. He was 19 years old, spoke almost no English, and had very little money. But he had something more valuable. He understood people. By the time he was in his 30s, Carlo had worked his way up through New York's criminal world carefully. He was never reckless. He never made moves without thinking them through. While other bosses screamed and threatened, Carlo listened and planned. While others made enemies carelessly, Carlo built alliances strategically. His rise was slow, but it was permanent. In 1957, he became the official boss of the Gambino crime family, one of the 5 most powerful mafia families in New York. But what made Carlo different from other bosses wasn't just his intelligence. It was his ability to project power without ever needing to raise his voice. He never needed to threaten people openly. He never needed to brag. His reputation did all the work for him. Men who had worked with Carlo for decades described him this way. He was like a chess grandmaster who had already seen 20 moves ahead before you even sat down at the board. He dressed modestly. He drove a regular car. He avoided fancy restaurants and expensive parties. He lived in a normal house in Brooklyn. When people who didn't know him first met him, they were often surprised. This quiet, small, simple-looking old man was the most powerful criminal in America. Yes, exactly him. That was part of his genius. He never let his ego get bigger than his power. He never needed people to fear him loudly, because they already feared him deeply, in the way that really counts. And Vincent Scalfa had just publicly disrespected him in front of a room full of men who understood all of this perfectly. Vincent Scalfa walked out of that dinner feeling like a winner. He had said what he wanted to say. He had stood up to Carlo Gambino, the legendary, untouchable Carlo Gambino, and nothing had happened. No shouting match, no threats, no immediate reaction. Carlo had just looked at him and gone back to eating. Scalfa went home that night and told his associates about it with pride. "I told the old man exactly what I thought," he bragged. and he had nothing to say. Nothing. That's how you know real power has shifted. The man is finished. He's a relic. His men laughed and poured more drinks. They celebrated what they thought was a bold move. But in the days that followed, something subtle began to happen. Phone calls that used to get returned quickly were suddenly taking longer. Business partners who used to visit Scalfa's social club stopped coming around as often. A shipment that was supposed to arrive from one of his suppliers was delayed, with no clear explanation. Small things. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that Scalfa could point to and say, "This is a threat." But for men who understood the language of the underworld, each of these small signs carried a very clear message. Carlo Gambino had made one phone call, maybe two. He had spoken quietly to the right people. He had not threatened anyone. He had not ordered any violence, not yet. He had simply begun to close doors. Slowly, quietly, the way a man who controls everything can make your world smaller and smaller without ever raising his hand. Scalfa's closest friend, a man named Tommy Ferrara, was the first one to understand. Tommy had been in this world long enough to read the signs. He went to Scalfa privately and said, "Vincent, you have to go apologize to Gambino. Right now. Today. What you said at dinner. You don't understand what you've started." Scalfa laughed at him. "Apologize? To that old man? I said what was true. If he's offended, that's his problem. I'm not going to beg for forgiveness from a man whose time has passed." Tommy looked at him with sad eyes and said nothing more. A week later, Tommy quietly moved his operations out of Scalfa's territory and aligned himself with a different crew, one that was under Gambino's protection. Scalfa noticed but still refused to believe what was happening. The second week, a major deal Scalfa had been building for months fell apart. The other party simply backed out with no real reason given. When Scalfa pressed for answers, all he heard was vague excuses. "It's not the right time. We need to reconsider. We'll be in touch." He never heard from them again. By the end of the second week, the circle around Vincent Scalfa had become noticeably smaller. The loud, energetic group of associates who used to crowd his social club every night had thinned out dramatically. Men were finding reasons to be somewhere else. But Scalfa's pride was stronger than his instinct for survival. He still refused to go to Gambino. He still told anyone who would listen that he had done nothing wrong, that the old man couldn't touch him. He was wrong in the most dangerous way possible. He was wrong, and he didn't know it. It was a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the dinner on Mulberry Street. Vincent Scalfa had dinner with 2 of his remaining associates at a small restaurant in Queens. He seemed almost relaxed, as if he had convinced himself the storm had passed, that maybe he had been right all along, and the old man had decided to let it go. He was still at the table when 2 men he knew, men who had once worked loosely in his orbit, came in and sat down with him. They were polite. They ordered coffee. They made small talk. Scalfa was friendly with them, clearly relieved to see familiar faces. Then one of them leaned in close and said quietly, "Mr. Gambino would like a word with you." Scalfa's face changed. He left with them that night. His 2 associates watched him walk out the door and did not follow. They understood what this was. No one knows exactly what happened in the hours that followed. What is known is that Vincent Scalfa was never seen publicly again. His name disappeared from conversations. His business interests were quietly absorbed by others. His associates moved on. His social club was taken over. It was as if the man had simply evaporated. No dramatic scene. No war in the streets. No newspaper headlines about a body found in a river. Just a quiet, total, permanent disappearance. The kind that happens when a man with real power decides a lesson needs to be delivered without any noise. The message spread through the underworld the way these messages always do. Not through announcements or speeches, but through the simple reality of what had happened. Every boss, every associate, every man who sat at any table connected to the New York crime families heard the story. And every one of them understood it completely. You do not disrespect Carlo Gambino. Not in public. Not privately. Not jokingly. Not drunk. Not ever. Because this quiet, modest-looking old man, who barely raised his voice, this man held the lives and livelihoods of hundreds of people in his hands. and he carried his power with a patience and restraint that made it all the more terrifying. He didn't need to react immediately. He didn't need to make a scene. He simply waited, watched, and then acted, cleanly and completely. The men who had been at that dinner on Mulberry Street never forgot what they witnessed. Some of them later said that the most frightening moment wasn't when Scalfa made his insult. It was the second after, when Carlo Gambino looked at him calmly, said nothing, and picked up his fork. That silence, that stillness, that was the moment everyone in the room knew Scalfa was already finished. Carlo Gambino went on to lead the Gambino crime family as its most powerful boss until his death in 1976, of natural causes, at home, surrounded by family. In a world where most men in his position met violent ends, Carlo Gambino died peacefully in his bed at the age of 74. That fact alone tells you everything about the kind of man he was. He outlasted every rival. He outmaneuvered every threat. He built something so solid, so deeply respected, and so quietly feared, that even his enemies hesitated to challenge him directly. And on the rare occasion when someone did, like Vincent Scalfa, the result was swift and final. But what does this story really teach us? What can we carry from this dark chapter of history into our own lives? The first lesson is this: real power never needs to announce itself. Carlo Gambino didn't need to shout back at Scalfa. He didn't need to flip the table, make threats, or storm out of the room. He was so deeply secure in his own power that he could absorb the insult calmly, finish his dinner, and handle the situation on his own terms and timeline. That kind of composure only comes from someone who truly knows their own strength. Insecure people react loudly. Genuinely powerful people respond quietly. The second lesson: your reputation is your greatest weapon and your greatest responsibility. Carlo spent decades building a reputation for keeping his word, being fair to those who respected him, and being absolutely unforgiving to those who betrayed him. That reputation was what made Scalfa's insult so dangerous, not just to Scalfa personally, but to the entire foundation of order that Gambino had built. If he had let it pass without consequence, every other man in that world would have quietly noted that Gambino could be disrespected without cost. The response wasn't just about one man. It was about maintaining a system of respect that protected hundreds of people. The third lesson is perhaps the hardest one. Pride can be more dangerous than any enemy. Vincent Scalfa had friends who tried to warn him. He had time to course correct. He could have gone to Gambino, spoken privately, apologized, and almost certainly been forgiven, because Carlo was not a cruel man, and he respected those who showed humility. But Scalfa's pride was stronger than his wisdom. He confused boldness with intelligence. He mistook the absence of immediate reaction for permission to continue. His pride cost him everything. How many times in life do we see this pattern? A person says something they shouldn't. They get quiet signals that they've crossed a line. And instead of stepping back with humility, they double down, because admitting a mistake feels like weakness. But in reality, the ability to recognize when you've made an error and correct it with grace is one of the most powerful things a person can do. The fourth lesson: in any world, business, family, community, or otherwise, the people who last are the ones who build genuine trust, not just fear. Carlo Gambino was feared, yes, but he was also respected in a way that went deeper than fear. The men who worked with him longest were genuinely loyal, not just because they were afraid of him, but because he was consistent, fair, and kept his commitments. He took care of his people. He never asked for anything he wasn't willing to give in return. That combination of respect and fear is far more durable than either one alone. And the final lesson, perhaps the simplest one: never judge a person's power by how loudly they speak. The quietest man in the room is often the one holding all the cards. If this story gave you something to think about, if it changed how you see power, respect, or pride, please like this video and subscribe to the channel right now. Every week we bring you stories like this one. True accounts of history's most powerful, most fascinating, and most misunderstood figures. Stories that don't just entertain, but teach. Stories that stick with you long after you've finished watching. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments below, what was the biggest lesson you took from this story? Was it the danger of pride? The patience of real power? Or the moment Scalfo walked out of that restaurant and never came back? Write your answer below. We read every single one. See you in the next story.